What about Agile methods used for embedded systems? It's not quite as obvious a fit. And so let's talk about some of the potential issues. A significant benefit of a well-run Agile project is that it can make good developers happier. Really capable developers don't like a lot of paperwork. They don't like a lot of interference. They'll just say, I know what I'm doing, go let me do my job. And Agile appeals to those kind of folks. Along with that, if you're in a situation where you know your requirements are going to change every few weeks, Agile is probably a better fit than Waterfall or V. But you still need to manage and moderate the risks, because if your requirements are changing every 3 weeks, you'll never actually get done. Agile might make the experience less painful, but you're still not going to get done until the requirements finish settling down. There are some issues and dysfunctions that happen with Agile commonly. I've seen all of these a number of times. So if you're going to use Agile, make sure you are aware of and mitigate the risks due to these issues. The first is Agile does not mean cowboy coding. If somebody says, oh, we're using Agile, what does that mean? It means we don't have to do paperwork anymore. No, that's not what Agile is. If it's, well, we don't have to follow a process because we're Agile. No, I just showed you a picture of an Agile process. So Agile doesn't mean do whatever you want. It means a different process model that you actually have to follow for this to work that has different trade-offs in a different organization. Undefined, undisciplined processes are bad news. And yes, Agile teams should follow a rigorously defined process. If there's an Agile team and you say, what process are you following? And they look at you and you say, draw it on the board. If they can't draw it on the board, they're not Agile. They're probably just going around doing stuff and claiming they're Agile. That usually ends poorly. Another issue is no paper Agile. If you have Agile that has gone all the way to zero paper at all, it might be okay for some applications, but basically you've decided that rather than write it down, all the information is going to be in the heads of a few people. If those people leave or retire or, as we like to say, win the lottery, you're going to have a problem because there's no record of the trade-offs that were made. Implicit knowledge can be efficient, especially with teams of 2 or 3 or 4 people, but it evaporates with a team and it does not scale well to really large teams. Can you do large projects with Agile? Well, I've seen it done, and usually it involves more paper for these kind of reasons. If you have a system that's 10 years old and was developed without any paperwork and you have to make changes or evolve it or build on it, it's an absolute nightmare. The no paper may help in the short term, but for a long-lived embedded system, there can be significant downstream costs, so be mindful of that when you decide how much paper to do. There's an issue that Agile more or less implicitly assumes 100% automated acceptance test, or at least a test that can be run in a couple days. Think about it. You've only got a 2-week or 3-week or 4-week sprint. That means you have to be able to run all the tests to make sure the system is working in a lot less than that, maybe only a day. If you have 100% automated tests and they run every night as part of your nightly build process, then you're probably in great shape. But if it takes 12 weeks of technicians pushing buttons and looking at outputs of an embedded system to do the product test, and you have a 3-week sprint, that doesn't work. There's no way to test in that environment fast enough to keep up with Agile. So that's an issue that has to be dealt with somehow. An underlying trade-off of Agile is it often implicitly assumes that defect escapes are low cost because the new version is only 2 to 4 weeks away. If you have a system where you can deploy updates in 24 hours or less, this might be viable. But if you're building embedded systems that once they're programmed, they go out to the field and it is difficult or impossible to update them, then the fact that the next sprint you fix the bug doesn't really help for all the products you shipped. That's a different trade-off than the primary sweet spot for an Agile process. Finally, an issue with Agile is it typically does not have independent process monitoring. It's rare to see an SQA, software quality assurance function. There are often embedded testers, and by embedded, that means embedded with the Agile team. So there may be a team that has some developers, some testers, and they work together and they all do the stand-ups together, but that's not quite the same as someone independently making sure the process is followed. Now, if you have senior responsible developers that are concentrating on doing the right thing, this might not be much of a problem, but not all teams are really seasoned developers that know how to follow a process with no one making sure that they didn't get it wrong or somehow skip a step by accident. SQA tells you if your process is working, and it's unusual to see that really called out in an Agile process. So you may be dysfunctional and have no idea there's a problem until you find out that your product doesn't work. Another way of looking at this is that many Agile teams trade off knowledge of how good their software is during development for a smaller team and faster progress. But at the end, either it worked out or it didn't. And so you're deferring knowing that